a new topic which is known as inheritance. It is topic number 17 as per the IGCSE syllabus. And let's start from the first learning outcome, which is chromosomes, genes and proteins. So the core syllabus content says that we should be able to know that chromosomes are made up of DNA, which contains genetic information in the form of genes. Defining that a gene is a length of DNA that codes for a protein, defining an allele as an alternative form of a gene, and describing the inheritance of sex or gender in humans with reference to X and Y chromosomes. So let's start. Now, the first learning outcome was that we have to state that chromosomes are made up of DNA, which contains genetic information in the form of genes. So this learning outcome shows us that we should know what do you mean by chromosomes, what do you mean by DNA, what do you mean by genetic information, and what do you mean by genes. So this means chromosomes, DNA, genetic information and genes. So for this reason, we have to understand that the nucleus of every cell of our body, this is our body and we have got trillions of cells. So if I pull out one cell of my body and look at it carefully, especially under the electron microscope, the nucleus is full of thread-like structures known as the chromosomes. It is these chromosomes that are made up of the molecule which is known as DNA, that stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and in short we can say that this is the molecule of heredity. Okay, so DNA is the molecule of heredity. So in short we can say that, I will just make a box so that we can sum up all the points. The human body is made up of trillions of cells. Every nucleated cell, when I say nucleated cell, of course I am excluding the red blood cell. So every cell which has a nucleus has thread-like structures known as chromosomes. And each chromosome is made up of the molecule of DNA. And what is DNA? In very simply stated, DNA is the molecule of heredity. What do you mean by this? It means that it is a molecule that can be transferred from one generation to another generation. So when any molecule has got the capability that it can be inherited from your parent, or from the parent it can be transferred to the offspring, this means that this is one of the very unique property of that molecule, that it can be passed from one generation to another. Another thing, let me just tell you some amazing facts about DNA. So what makes it a special and a unique molecule? DNA, which means it stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It is the molecule of heredity. It is a code of instructions, And what are those instructions? There are instructions inside the DNA that will determine, these instructions determine the characteristics of our body. What do you mean that they determine the characteristics of our body? Basically, DNA, which is the molecule of heredity and which contains a code of instructions, those instructions are actually meant to carry out certain functions of the body, and the most important function is the synthesis of proteins. Because for every chemical reaction, we need proteins as enzymes. Majority of the hormones in our body are proteins. All enzymes are proteins. Lots of neurotransmitters are proteins. We have got structural proteins like collagen, elastin. Hemoglobin is a protein. So this means that DNA contains these code of instructions that are going to determine which kind of protein is going to be made. So every characteristic that we have is nothing but a kind of a protein, right? So if we have no DNA, we have no code of instructions, and if we have no code of instructions, then we have no characteristics, which means characteristics, every characteristic, starting from the color of the skin to the color of the eyes to the texture of the hair to the presence, the height and the weight and the complexion, and everything is actually determined by the DNA, which is the code of instructions. And every cell which has a nucleus has these long thread-like structures known as chromosomes, and every chromosome is made up of a DNA molecule. Let's dig deeper into it. Okay, so I am zooming into a cell. So this is a cell and this is a nucleus. Now we are zooming into the nucleus. So inside the nucleus you have these structures which I am drawing right now. And these structures are known as thread-like structures, are known as chromosomes. So this is one chromosome. Sometimes the chromosomes can appear a single structure like this, and sometimes they can appear a double structure like this. It depends upon at which stage of the cell cycle the cell is right now. If the cell is undergoing cell division by mitosis, the chromosomes might appear like this, double. And if the cell is not undergoing mitosis, the chromosome will appear like this. So this means that if you see something like this, then this means the cell is just about to divide. And if you see the chromosome like this, it means the cell is not in a dividing phase or state. Okay, and this entire length of chromosome, the one which I am coloring right now, whether I draw the chromosome like this as a double structure or whether I draw the chromosome like this as a single structure, I would say it is made up of DNA, right? Achha, since it's made up of DNA, DNA is a very, very long molecule, right? In that long molecule of DNA, of course, there's not one single instructions, but there are many, many instructions. So this means that the DNA is divided into smaller chunks, and each small chunk or each small bit or each small unit of DNA is going to code for a different protein. Let me show you how. I am now drawing a huge chromosome to show you how each small chunk of DNA is responsible for the synthesis of a different protein. So let me make these small chunks of DNA over here. So when I'm using separate colors, this means I'm showing you separate characteristics. Okay, so I have drawn these different chunks of DNA. So instead of using the word chunk or portion of DNA or a bit of DNA, we use the word gene. So what is gene? A gene is a section of DNA. Now I'm giving you a proper textbook definition. A section of DNA that codes for a protein. Codes, because DNA is a code, so it's coding for a protein. So what is gene? The gene is a section of the DNA that codes for a protein / you can also say polypeptide, because it's one and the same thing. Why am I using this word polypeptide? Because polypeptide, you will also see such kind of a definition in some books, so both of them are correct. So a gene is a section of the DNA that codes for a polypeptide. Just to give you a better understanding, let's assume that this is the gene that is coding for the protein. Which protein? Okay, the protein that is responsible for the color of your eyes. Okay, so let's not take the example of color of the eyes, the color of the fur of a rabbit. Okay, so a rabbit might be of white color, it may be of brown color, it may be of black color, grayish color, different colored rabbits, right? So depending upon what the color is, the rabbit will have a different gene. A white rabbit will have a gene that is going to code for a protein that will give it a white fur, and a brown rabbit will be having a gene that will code for a protein that will give it a brown color, right? So it's like this. Now these genes can be exactly the same. For example, this gene is responsible for giving white color to the rabbit's fur. Okay, and so this means that this is the gene, I would say, gene that codes for the white color of rabbit's fur, right? But sometimes what happens is that since we are the product of our mother and father, so we might inherit different colored genes for our complexion. Or let's assume in this case a rabbit. Okay, so you have a male rabbit and a female rabbit, and the gamete from a male rabbit and a gamete from a female rabbit will fuse to form a zygote. So this gamete, let's say, gives you a gene that is coding for white color, and this is also giving you a gene that is coding for white color. This is one scenario. Another scenario can be that this male parent is giving a gamete which has a gene that is coding for white color, and then this parent, the other parent, is giving a gene which is coding not for white color, but it is coding for, let's say, brown color. Okay, brown color. So this means that, let's now look at these two genes. Okay, in fact I will draw it on a separate page once again. Again I'm drawing a chromosome. Okay, and this is one gene and this is another gene. So I'm just drawing a line to show you. Both these genes are coding for what characteristic? Both the genes are coding for one characteristic, and that is the color of the fur. Okay, the characteristic is, I am writing it in inverted commas, color of the fur. Acha, this is a rabbit, okay, that inherited one brown colored, let me use a brown color, a brown colored gene from one of the parent, from the mother, and it inherited for white, I'm just showing you a gray thing so that it shows a white color gene from another parent, right? So on our chromosomes we can have exactly the same genes, like white over here and white over here, or we can have different genes also. Why? Because we have inherited different genes from male and female parents. So it's not always that the genes are the same on the chromosome. They can be different also. So whenever the genes are different, they are known as, what are they known as? They are known as alleles. What do you mean by alleles? Allele means, alleles are defined as different forms of the same gene are the alleles. Why am I saying same gene? क्योंकि ये gene कौन सी है? This is the gene that is coding for one characteristic that is known as the color of the fur. ठीक है? अच्छा, लेकिन ये genes क्या same हैं? नहीं. One of them is coding for the brown color and the other is coding for the white color. So they are different. If you find different forms of the same gene, then they are known as alleles. So अब हम इनको alleles बोलेंगे. I will say this is the allele. Let me relabel. This is the allele for brown color, brown fur color, and this is the allele for, let me use a dark gray, the allele for white colored fur. Okay, so this gives us an idea about the fact that the genes can be the same or they can be different also. If they are different and if they are different forms of the same gene, they are known as alleles. What is DNA? DNA is a molecule of heredity. Where do we find DNA? We find DNA in the chromosomes. Chromosomes are thread-like structures which are seen inside the nucleus. Since we say chromosomes are made up of DNA, and since DNA is a very long molecule, just to give you an idea about the length of the DNA molecule, I would say that you can just see the comparison, okay, just to give you an idea. Your nucleus, this is your cell and this is your nucleus. The size of the nucleus is 6 micrometers, which means 6 into 10 raised to the power minus 6 meters. And the DNA that has to be stuffed inside the nucleus is how many meters long? 1.8 meters long. So 1.8 meters long DNA has to be stuffed inside such a tiny space, and how much is that space? It is 6 micrometers. Look how long the DNA is. And then we say that DNA is a code of instructions. So of course those instructions are not just jumbled up all together. Those instructions are very neatly and very properly, precisely and accurately organized in the form of small units, and those small units are known as genes. They are nothing but they are chunks of DNA or they are units of DNA. In fact, I can give you many definitions of gene. Let me give you another definition. So let's define gene once again. Just to summarize, I can say gene is, and all of these are correct, unit of inheritance or the smallest unit of inheritance. Gene is a section of DNA. Gene is a portion of DNA. All of these are correct, but the last one is the most comprehensive. A portion of DNA that codes for a polypeptide or a protein. Let's look at the learning outcome. Let's go back to the learning outcome once again and